Okay, good morning,
Good
Morning.
morning.
Gardener trainees.
Morning.
I hope you had a good Memorial Day weekend. Although it was rainy, but we needed it, so
We did.
we did. um, let's see. Have the memory sticks Holly sent you been helpful?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. We are going to get into vegetables today.
Hello, Ralph.
Hello.
It's Vicky Lou.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Vicky.
Very good.
I'm green today. I just want to say something.
Go ahead.
Lynn taught me how to add things to my thumb drive. Like when Holly has sent us other
Oh, yeah.
presentations, I didn't know that you could add that to your thumb
Oh,
drive.
yeah.
And Lynn taught me. So thank you, Lynn.
Very good.
You're welcome.
Well, today's program, I'm going to do a general vegetable program, and this is a normal Master Gardener curriculum PowerPoint. Then we're going to do a special tropical vegetable one, which Gene McAvoy produced, and then we'll go do one just on pests, on vegetable insects and disease. So that will be today's program. So I'm going to mute you all, and we'll move on from there. Okay. Let's see if this will proceed. There we go. Next. Okay, so, through this, and, I'm sure that a lot of you have certainly planted vegetable gardens. Certainly in Florida, it's way different. There's more opportunities. There's more difficulties in a way. And so it's just a matter of making some adjustments to our weather here. And so we'll look about, preparation, how to plant a garden, how to manage it, and then they'll go through a few pests here, but I'll go through some more specific ones too. So, all right, and of course, vegetable gardening, get you outside, unless it's raining like this weekend. It's definitely a form of exercise. It's an enjoyable thing too, because you actually, for your energy and effort, you produce something. And by doing that, of course, that gives you very many mental and physical benefits. Certainly fresh vegetables, although, you say, well, I can get these at the supermarket. But hey, who knew about this coronavirus that would, for a while, make going to the supermarket more difficult when you could have your vegetables right in your backyard. And, to some degree, it's going to be economic savings. We can't produce everything all the time, but certainly we can produce often as much or more during our year-round vegetable gardening than a lot of other places. And as Gene McAvoy would have told you, that Southwest Florida is the salad bowl of America for as far as winter production. And in our area, of course, all types of vegetables. Watermelon is a big one too. They have their organic ones like Warden Farms, Lady Moon, and there's some others too. And where they have community supported agricultural type setups where you'll buy a subscription and you get a box per week of whatever's available at that time. Most of the vegetable growers during the summer are going to take the months off because they need the break, I would imagine. But to get started again, of course, at the end of the summer. So we can grow vegetables year round, and I tend to do that myself. because I just don't want it just sitting there. Although visiting one of the community gardens the other day, I see a lot are going to sleep under their clear plastic blankets for the long summer months there, and that's fine too. In general, we're going to say the very best time for a lot of the vegetables that we're more familiar with is going to be that fall, early winter time, maybe a little spring too. But during the summer, we can certainly grow ones that grow better here traditionally: okra and sweet potatoes, southern peas, and then many of the tropical ones. And we'll go through that in a separate program too. Um, Oops, I can't see with that thing in the way. Okay. Of course, our soils, again, as Gene McAvoy would say, our soils are good for holding the vegetables up. That's about it. But we do have a lot of need to build up our soils, and our pest pressure can be pretty big. All right. Planning and planting. So it all depends. There's so many different ways to grow gardens, whether it's sort of the traditional, um, and this is a fairly large scale backyard one, but in rows in the soil. And then there's, hydroponics rather, and all different ranges of that with just generally soilless type operations with circulating fertilized water going through. Um, and that's one way to go. And then again, raised gardens seems to be it as far as the most popular method, because it does allow you to work on both sides of the unit, which is generally going to be a unit of we'll say no more than 4 foot wide, and then as long as you want, generally probably 8 to 16 foot units. But it allows you, so you don't have to walk on the soil. You can work on it even when it's wet. You can reach in on both sides, and then some of these could be raised even higher if it to accommodate a physical disability too. And there's different ways of doing this, whether it's just a mounded soil or if it's a complex box type setup. All these work perfectly well, and it all depends what people want to do, and including um, small scale gardening in large containers, large buckets or pots or whatever. But really, for our best success with vegetables, you need full sun, and that 5 to 6 hours is a minimal. You got to have as much sun as possible, because a lot of these things are either producing leaves or fruits or roots, and they need that full sun as the engine to power the production of those. Water, super important too. Can't really depend on the rain. Although the rainy season can be very helpful, but it may not be sufficient sometimes. And then tree roots or other plants around it. Trees roots can reach at least 3 times the reach of their branches, and they're going to be able to take away nutrients. And that can be, of course, not only trees but also weeds too. And well-drained soil. A lot of these things that we grow are not going to survive very long in wet or puddled water. And if you've ever had that problem happen, it's very discouraging. So you're going to clear the area as you're starting. You've picked out your spot. Um, Definitely, you're going to amend the soil with organic matter. You just can never have enough organic matter to put into your soil. In truly tropical areas, I think I understand that a lot of the organic matter gets taken back up by the trees and the shrubs and is really stored there. So anything that drops is quickly recycled. And organic matter in tropical areas doesn't last that long either. It tends to break down quicker. So by putting as much organic matter, and that's going to be in the form of compost or composted manure or whatever um, that you can get, it really pays off. And doing it yearly is definitely in order. Um, Testing the soil pH now. Although in our organic amended soils, it's probably going to be a little bit more on the acidic side, acidic to neutral side. We may want to test that. There's one thing you never do. You never put wood ashes into a vegetable garden. People may have burned something, and even up north, people were doing this where they took wood ashes from a fireplace or a burn pile and put it, thinking it was lime like, and it was lime like to the extreme, where the soil pH might go up to like 11, and and it almost sterilized the soil because the plants couldn't live in that. They couldn't uptake the nutrients they needed. So most of our vegetables are going to be close to neutral. Um, and you're going to try to adjust it if needed. It's very difficult sometimes to do that. But if you sock a lot of organic matter to it, it's going to be very close to neutral in range as compared maybe to the rest of your landscape. And again, the organic matter, if you have access to composted manures, that's good. Keep in mind that, of course, manure can be hot, and so it has to be well rotted, as they say, or broken down to use. Compost, you may make compost in your own yard there. I doubt you ever have enough. And then cover crops too. Cover crops can be handy in certain times of the year there, if there's an open spot. So they would call these green manures because they would tend to add organic matter to the soil, maybe some nitrogen, like cowpeas is a good summer um, cover crop, or you can get a crop and of course it's going to fix nitrogen and add that to the soil. Hairy indigo is another legume type thing. Um, and during the winter, probably annual rye. And that's sort of a typical classic one from up north where you would grow it during the fall and winter and then till it in the spring before you planted it there. And the idea was to add organic matter. The roots tend to also help with drainage. And so all these types of things are good. Now, if you were to solarize, and of course we're getting close to that time, sort of June, July, August time when you can do this, and we've talked a little bit about this to manage nematodes, because definitely nematodes can be a problem. But I will say that my own personal nematode problems with okra, especially where they became so numerous, I had to abandon certain sites and start and try other areas. But I did find that adding compost really did the trick to suppress that problem. I've never done solarization, soil solarization. Yes, say that 5 times fast. But I would say it is a good thing, especially if you don't want to do summer gardening, by using the clear plastic and heating it up for that period of time. You begin, at least you begin with a sterile soil, not only for nematodes but weed seeds, diseases, insects. So it's very clean soil that you end up with. Um, what can you plant? When can you plant? Well, I will again probably bring you back to the Florida Vegetable Guide. I think that's the title, the EATIS publication, and that is really a good starting point for all your vegetable questions as far as recommended varieties, when to plant, some possible pest problems, et cetera, et cetera. So, but you want to figure all these out as you're planning your garden. Some plants are going to do best from seeds, some from transplants. Um, Certainly, things grow way quicker than you think and much bigger than you think, so you got to give the appropriate space too. I don't know what this is, the vegetable challenge. We'll certainly do that another time, I guess. Blink. But again, the vegetable gardening guide, if you haven't looked at it, it's the one that we would always give people to begin their vegetable adventure and help them to start thinking about certain things. Again, with the EATIS website, there are other specific vegetable fact sheets And so you can always take a look at those too. Okay, what and when to plant. So really we divide vegetables into warm season and cool season. And although, if you go to the garden centers, sometimes there's things there that probably shouldn't be there, but at the particular time, because number one, they don't grow at that time, or they don't grow here. I mean, how many times have I seen rhubarb for sale that doesn't grow here? And really, asparagus too is another one. Fava beans, that's another one. It's not enough cool weather to get them to properly produce. But our warm season ones are going to be ones you would think up north a little bit there. All types of beans, corn, which is extremely difficult to get through. I between the corn borers and the earworms, and then the squirrels, it's a lot of work. Cucumbers are fine. Eggplants do really well. Certainly okra, peppers. The summer squash I try to get for a late winter, early spring crop. It tends to be when there's less pest problems. And tomatoes. Now you could, generally though they would say the large fruited tomatoes are best for the August, um, fall, early winter crop. But the cherry tomatoes can take more heat, so you might do that for a spring crop. And you look at the Everglades tomatoes. I guess they can just grow year round pretty much too. The cool season veggies, they're going to go in the garden as it begins to cool off, of course, and that's going to be maybe as early as September, October-ish, depends when they're available. You'll have to look at how many days from seed to harvest or transplant to harvest to time those, but these love the winter. They'll take a frost. I mean, they're just so good for our winter time, and they will produce abundantly. Um, and without too much problems. Now, looking at onions here, just to mention that we need the short day onions. The long day onions are for the northern part of the country, but we have to have short day onions. The long day onions will never produce a bulb. They'll be fine for green scallions, but they will never produce a bulb. So you got to get ones that are labeled as short day onions. And you can get those generally as plants, but sometimes as sets too. Good question. Seeds or transplants? Early or late start? How often is the vegetable harvested? Now, using radish as an example. A radish can be in by seed and done in as early as 30 days. So you're only going to harvest that once, of course, but you could make what they call successive plantings every couple of weeks, so you have a constant supply of them too. And the radish is going to be one of those that we're going to plant from seed. Let me see here. Oops. Beans go from seed to seed. Cucumbers, I still like from seed. Eggplants, transplant. Okra from seed. Peppers from transplants. Squash from seed. Tomatoes from transplant. If you tried to make a transplant of like a bean, it's probably going to get messed up or stunted. They don't like their roots messed up there. Broccoli from transplant, cabbage from transplant, carrots should be direct seeded. Collards, transplants, or I've direct seeded them too. Kale, I like to direct seed those. I think they do better. Lettuce, direct seed or transplants. Of course, onions are going to be transplants, and radishes are definitely going to be started from seed, not try to start them as transplants and move them in. There's too many things that are going to stunt them and mess them up, and it's not going to work. Again, staggered transplants can be those that are planted again every 2 weeks or so you have a constant supply. And then transplantability. Ooh, say that 5 times fast. So we're looking here about ones that you could, say, grow in a little pot and then transplant, or even in a row as you thin them out, could you transplant them? Um, they've got beets, cabbage, eggplants, lettuce, tomatoes, sweet potatoes. All those would, and the sweet potato is going to be done totally different, of course. They're going to be coming from rooted slips. So when you see shoots come out of a potato, a sweet potato, each of those shoots would be rooted and then planted. But these will, from seed anyways, transplant very well. Um, I don't think carrot. I would never try carrot. I might try mustard or onion, but I would never try spinach or such. So they're going to take care. And difficult, and I would say don't do it. Bean corn, any of the cucurbits like cucumbers and melons and such, wouldn't do it. Or nor okra, nor radish, I guess, nor turnips here too. So a lot of these things have to be started from seed, and some have to be done from transplants. It's going to work every time. Okay, so when you're starting from seed, then you have a whole world's possibility of varieties. And, you know, you look at the local seed racks and they have a certain set. But if you go into online to gardening catalogs, you have a lot more choice, and some are often specific to southern gardens too. Fresh seed is important too. You know, some seed is going to be very perishable. I think onion and corn doesn't last too long, but things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, they can last up to 5 years if you put them in a, you know, a well-sealed container, um, in a cool, dry place. So that's gonna help. But fresh seed, and again, you want to be careful about keeping seed sometimes from year to year, because again, it could be a hybrid, which would revert to its parents, which may not particularly good. It may harbor disease too. So some fresh seed is, I mean, some seed that you keep from year to year may be okay, but start with fresh seed. Sometimes you can see seed that's pink, and that's got a fungicide on, and it does help um, as they begin to grow to ward off diseases at least. But keep in mind that's a fungicide, so you'll have to be careful about handling. And pick pest-resistant varieties. I always tell people, you know, there's a lot of foliar diseases of, say, cucumbers, and anthracnose and downy mildew, powdery mildew, angular leaf spot, and such. They can really ruin a crop before you even get going. So I try to pick out one, and you can look on the label. It will tell you all the resistance to it. Doesn't mean they may not eventually get it, but they'll be able to bear it much better than ones that don't have this built-in resistance. So try to pick those, and then you won't have to worry about fungicide. You'll have other problems, of course, like pickle worms and such, but at least you don't have to worry about that. So resistance is helpful. I will say though, for nematode resistance in tomatoes, it's my understanding as it gets hotter, the nematode resistance begins to wither away. So it doesn't do well when it gets hot, as far as the nematodes then overwhelming the plant. But here's the things you'll be looking for, the abbreviations and such, to let you know that they are resistance. And you've probably seen these before. If you haven't looked before on the label or the seed pack, it will talk about these various resistances: verticillium wilt, fusarium wilt, nematode, alternaria stem canker, tobacco mosaic virus, gray leaf spot, tomato spotted wilt virus. These are again going to have different resistances, and they will also be It may be a little bit more expensive, but they pay off. They really pay off. And these are standard breeding programs. It's no genetically modified type of thing here. It's just uh, they've bred them, and they found that year to year there's resistance. So that's a good way to start. Planting with seeds, and again, preparing the soil properly, of course, too, to receive them. But plant seed no deeper than 2 times its size. And just a note here, you can see these seeds are pink, and they may be the natural color, but they might have a fungicide on them too, just as I mentioned. You want to plant a little thicker because number one, it's good to thin, but not every seed's going to make it too. So to have a good stand of plants, sometimes you want to plant a little bit thicker. Small seeds. Now, small seeds, you don't want to be covering very much because maybe you're used to like beans, of course. That's going to be, like right here, a little bit deeper. But some of these tiny seeds, thinking of carrot as an example, they don't need a lot of coverage. And you know what I do too, um, often just to help them break through the soil, I will cover just that little row in there with just a little bit of, any of your sterile potting medium. Helps them come up a lot quicker. Sometimes with the soil that's there, it gets a little crusty. So that easy to break through the crust of the soil with that little added potting medium helps a lot. And then you got to thin. You've got to thin almost beyond what you can bear sometimes to allow these plants to grow rapidly and get big. If, for instance, if you don't thin out your carrots, you're going to get a million little, inch by 3 millimeter size whips of vegetable instead of the full size thing. So you got to let them grow quickly to their mature normal size by thinning, as per the label. The label will often tell you how much space to give them. So if you don't thin them out, there's going to be a lot of competition. There may be even more disease issues. So here's some okra here. And again, I don't know what they would say on this. I would say at least 6 inches apart on these. And you got plenty of good ones to select from. So you just go through and start thinning them out with your best guesses. And sometimes you may do a couple thinnings, as you let them begin to make it. Okay, everything's doing good. You may take a few more out, but you always want to have a few as backups just in case something happens. A rabbit, a bird, a disease, whatever. Transplants, again, the stores at the particular times of the year are filled with these. There's a couple companies that seem to supply most of them. You can certainly grow your own. How many times do you get little containers like this, or sometimes the garden centers give them away, that you could go ahead and start your own. I try to do that too, especially if I've got some varieties I can't get locally. But sometimes they have just perfectly fine ones too that I would use because they're ready, they're good looking, and well, that's the other thing. Get them as soon as they come off the truck, because you never know when they've been sitting there for a while. How have they been cared for? Often they put them in overly shaded areas, which gets them more used to shade. And sometimes some transplants sit there so long that they start getting like white flies, and inspect them before you bring them home. So generally, most of these transplants are going to be, we'll say, 4 to 6 weeks old. And, the way they're grown in their little units, it becomes a little self-contained root ball. So you don't want to mess up those roots as you take them out. And they usually press out in a complete unit very easily. You want to, of course, moisten them when they're put into the soil. Keep them at the proper depths. Now, tomatoes you could plant deeper, but a lot of these you don't want to put um, too much deeper, especially things like the cabbage and broccoli. Again, you've certainly enriched the soil where you're going to put them at. Check the distances too. Now, like cabbage, I mean, you can get mini cabbages. They can fit more mini cabbages in a certain area, and they become one serving type meals. You can also take full size cabbages and give them less space, and they will become mini cabbages in effect too, because they're sort of pushing into each other. Water is the most important ingredient. They're talking about a little starter fertilizer. Sometimes you can take some liquid fertilizer and dilute it, and that will give them a little boost there too. But a lot of these vegetables, we want steady, constant growth that makes for succulent, delicious plants. And as Gene McAvoy was saying, just quoting him again, vegetables like us like to eat every day. So we want to make sure they're having enough nutrients too. Now, in addition to transplants, we're going to have potentially some tuberous or bulb type things that we might put in. I usually I've grown sweet potatoes in the past. I've had terrible whitefly infestations, it seems like. It's just, they come in and you think you've got them, and all of a sudden they just overtake. But I still think sweet potatoes are a worthy crop to try here. And but with them, what are you using? You're generally going to use, well, when you buy them, you'll get like a bundle. Say that you bought 25 Beauregard sweet potatoes, and they come in as rooted cuttings. They don't look really good when they come in, so you want to soak them in some water to get them sort of rehydrated. And then you're planting those slips, and each slip will become a plant with several potatoes attached to it. So that would be a rooted cutting. Now the potatoes, a potato tuber is really just a swollen stem, and each of those eyes is just a node. So you just cut it, with a piece of the tuber with the eye, and let it dry for a day or so till it's calloused over, and then you plant it generally about, we'll say, 8 inches apart. Often people will make a uh, trench of sorts and not fill the trench in fully, but as the potato grows, you put more soil in around it, and it tends then to cover the potato tubers that are growing underneath better, because you don't want them exposed to the sun where you're going to get some greening and such there. With onions, you're generally going to get a started onion plant or a set. And again, the onion plants, you can find a lot of those that are short day. It's harder to find the little starts, the little bulbs to put in that are short day. So you'll have to be careful with that. But again, that's just one. Prepare the soil. You sort of push it into the soil. And again, early on, you may have onion greens or scallions from that. And then sometimes you can then thin those out to the mature. And the short day Florida onions are, really famous. They're big. They don't keep well, but they're big and crispy and pretty delicious there too. So you've got to try those, because you'll have more onions and you know what to do with, but you can't store them. Now, the chayote is a tropical fruit we'll look at later too. And it's interesting. It's really a squash relative, but the fruit contains a giant seed in there. And actually you can have the fruit sprout at one end where the seed starts coming to life. So you actually plant a whole fruit as the seed. Now, a lot of people ask about garlic, and garlic's trickier to grow here. It's really a winter crop, and you should select what they call the soft-necked varieties. I've not grown it myself, but this is the advice I've gotten. Again, winter time. So that's going to be, October-ish, putting it in, and then harvesting it probably on the flip side by March. But soft-necked garlic are the ones that do best in Florida. Now, you may have some space, but sometimes you can take better advantage of it by using upright or vertical growing space. And there's a number of trellises that you can make, find, or see the systems how to set up. Sometimes you can get the netting and just string it, or just have some kind of a temporary trellis of strings or ropes or whatever. But it's going to get those vining crops off the ground, so they don't rot, and it's going to allow you to use some other unavailable space. And so you place it on the north side to minimize shading, because you don't want it to be a big shade screen either, for that. And let's see, presently I've got yard-long beans growing on a trellis. I'll have also bitter melon on a trellis. And during the winter, and this would be probably December, January, I might put this in, sugar snap peas I would grow on a trellis too. Another good way to go, especially with some types of greens and such, is wide rows. And instead of just a nice little neat row and then a spacing, another row, you have a more thickly planted block of plants. And this might, again, that could be kale there, or collards. And you tend to let them grow side by side because it shades out the weeds, helps keep the moisture in a little bit too. And you can work on both sides, but you can either harvest the whole plant or just the leaves. If you harvest the whole plant, you're going to give yourself more space for individual plants, so it will continue to grow and grow. But in this method, you might have way more than you ever need to. And you've probably seen this in some organic gardening type settings too, but it does work quite well, and you get a lot of production in a small area. All right, let's see, I gotta get this out of the way here. Wide row garden. Okay, and it just showing how to set this up where you're making or outlining the area and making some shallow furrows. You're putting the seed down. It's really going to be a broadcast type thing, lightly raking and then firming with the hoe. And then you can, again, let it grow as a whole thick crop and then harvest, or again, certainly you can thin them out to individual plants with enough spacing. But the idea being that in this way you have a solid block of the material. And again, this is going to be best for leafy type vegetables. All right, next. Boom. Oh boy, gotta move this again. I can't see. Okay, how to maximize space. Well, what they're doing here is they're interplanting. So um, radishes are very quick. They'll come up in a few days, and some of them as early as 30 days and ready to harvest. So what they'll do sometimes, and if you've ever done this before, it works quite well, is to interplant carrots and radishes. The radishes come up first and sort of mark the row because the carrots take longer to come up. And certainly by the time the carrots are hardly getting growing there, the radishes come out. It allows you to sort of loosen the soil a little bit there too. And of course, you're going to have to thin out some of the carrots, but the idea is you're getting two crops in one area. The radishes are in and out quick. They mark the row where they are, and then they are going to help sort of loosen the soil and help with some of the thinning at the time of harvest. And then you finish it, of course, with the carrots, which are going to be much longer in their growing interval there. Oops. Okay, here's another one too. Although, what is this here? I've seen with corn. You've ever heard of the three sisters? Corn, squash, and beans, where they'll have, we'll say, hills of corn, and around them are beans are grown. The beans grow up the corn to a degree, and then squash around it, and of course that grows out from it. So you get three different types of crop that tend to coexist pretty well. But here they're showing where they're using corn to sort of shade the lettuce a little bit. It can take a little bit more shade. And at some point, the corn will be done, and then they'll come in and finish with the lettuce there. So it's just good use of your space to get a lot of different things in. Here's the one again with the beans trellised on the corn. They'll grow up the corn stalk, and the beans, being legumes, will make their own nitrogen, so they will have some benefit to the corn because it's a nutrient hog there as far as what it needs to grow quickly. And you can add again one more, and often you space it a little bit more too, where you might have several corn plants in a hill. Then you've got the beans growing up, and then you've got the squash. And that was a Native American planting technique. And here's showing staggered plantings. We talked about succession planting. So here's a set coming into production. Here's a set not quite there, and then another set. So maybe they're putting them in every 2 weeks. And this way, you have a set that you're consuming. You finish that, and just in time, the next set comes in, and so it's sort of a way of continuing or spreading out the harvest, so it's not a once and done type of thing, and that can be helpful for not be disappointed, because when something comes in once and you're done, you say, "Oh boy, wish we had more of that." You certainly can map these things out on paper before you put it down. Helps you dream a little bit. And I think, was it Gene McAvoy said something about that uh, gardening catalogs have the most inspirational pictures and thoughts and they do get you going. I mean, I get when I get gardening catalogs, I sort of go through them all and see what's new and sort of dream of the garden that they could be. But you can do this on your own time as far as uh, marking up or planning out visually on paper a garden. Okay, maintaining a vegetable garden, part 2. Mulching, watering, fertilizing, weeding, and pest management. All right, now mulching, now you got to be careful with mulching in uh, vegetable type settings there. Because you don't want something, we'll start with the organic. We don't want something organic that could take nitrogen away from the vegetable plants, because say that somebody used wood chips or sawdust or something that had a lot of carbon in it, and you put it down, the microorganisms in the soil are going to take nitrogen from the soil in order to break down that carbon, and they're going to steal it from the plant in effect, and you're going to start seeing yellowing and poor growth. So you want to be careful with some of this too. I generally don't mulch because I want to be able to weed. I generally don't have a lot of excess mulch hanging around either for that. So just be careful about what you use. And some of it, of course, could be flammable as well. But if you've got some to use, use it, but be very careful that it's well broken down and doesn't compete with the plants. Synthetically, well, around here, I just don't, they have a lot of that landscape fabric, and I wouldn't use that for vegetables per se. But up north, we used to use a lot of just plain plastic and cut holes in it. I mean, it was temporary, of course, but it added the feature was held moisture in, but it also warmed up the soil. We don't really need that help here so much. But I know people of, and I have used newspaper and cardboard to put between the rows, just to suppress weeds, and that works pretty good and tends not to be taking a lot of nitrogen from the soil there. So pick what you want, but I just know that I personally don't use mulch in vegetable gardens. But the benefits would be, and of course, this person looks like they have a lot of leaves here. It's going to suppress weeds, it's going to hold moisture in. Um, I will say that one thing, especially with tomatoes, there's a lot of fungal diseases that are in the soil, and when it rains or irrigation hits the soil, it splashes particles up onto the leaves. With a mulch, that splashing is thwarted, and you don't get that, and you'd have less foliar diseases and fruit diseases that splash up. I see that particularly, or mention it particularly for tomatoes, anyways. Certainly, mulch is going to add to the soil because it's going to break down. So that's another benefit too. So again, if you've got it, use it carefully. It has its benefits. Watering. Well, that's a tricky one too. Of course, depending on the weather. Generally, just like a lot of things we water, we want to do it early in the day so it can get dried off and not promote any disease. Frequency is going to depend a lot. They're showing here young plants need 1 inch of water per week, but it's spaced out too. It's not 1 inch one day and that's it. Mature plants may need 2 inches, but they're a little bit more well established, so it can be applied less often too. But just be careful, and if you can get, micro irrigation, so much the better. We generally want to try to keep from wetting the leaves because that will promote disease, of course. And so it's an art and a science. Fertilizing. Well, we want to keep the plants growing. Certainly, we want the nutrients to be in a solution so the plants can uptake it too. And we want to keep the nutrients around where the root zone is as well. And there's a variety of different types of fertilizers dependent. Generally, for leafy vegetables, we want something probably a little higher in nitrogen. For roots or fruits, probably things a little bit less in nitrogen. We generally have plenty of phosphorus, but we may or may not have it in that particular spot in the garden. Certainly potassium and all the micronutrients are important as well. So leafy crops, again, as I mentioned here, they're going to appreciate more nitrogen. Now it says ammonium nitrate here. Ammonium nitrate, of course, is what they have sometimes used in bomb making. So that's regulated quite a bit. I would say a lot of times here we have ammonium sulfate. So, whatever's in your vegetable mix, it's probably going to be some ammonium product, but probably not nitrate. Legumes are going to need less because they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria that cause it to form these little nodules on the roots, not to be mistaken for nematodes, which then help the plant uptake nitrogen from the atmosphere. And potassium is, again, almost like a multivitamin. Helps the plant grow better. It helps it more to be more resistant to a lot of things, including environmental stresses. And it's important for roots and fruits too. And as far as what you use, certainly pound for pound, organic fertilizer is more expensive. Tends not to burn. It's not as quickly available to the plant. Inorganic, pound for pound, is less expensive. Tends to be more rapidly available to the plant, but it can burn. So, it's up to you what you want to use, of course, but just keep in mind that vegetable plants are going to do better if they have a steady supply of nutrients as they develop and grow. Now, weeding, in a way, weeding can be very, I'm going to say, soothing. Now everybody's saying, well, you come over and weed my garden and you can get soothed over my garden. Well, um, you got to do it your own garden, sorry. But you got to be careful, of course, with hoeing and cultivating so that you don't accidentally cut the roots. Hand pulling is definitely easy to do as long as you get the whole plant. Mulching will suppress those weeds too. And you don't want to bring in weed seeds with your soil amendments that may have not been heat treated. And by potentially solarizing it, you can keep the area weed free as much as possible during the off times. Some of the pests here, and again, we'll talk more in detail of the pest part. There can be what they call biotic or living problems, insects and mites, diseases and nematodes. Of course, this is a tobacco hornworm on tomato. Let's see here. I can't see at the top very well. What's the top? Pest man. Okay. No pesticide tips. Well, if you plant things at the proper time, you're going to find that you might be able to miss some of the pest pressure times. Rotate vegetables too. If you've got tomatoes in one area, what will happen is diseases will build up in that spot. But if you rotate it out and plant, say, for instance, beans in that site, it will break up disease cycles and you'll have a lot less problems. Talked about pest-resistant varieties, very good. Have healthy transplants right from the get-go. Don't bring any whiteflies in by accident. If you keep them growing vigorously, they're going to do so much better. I remember when I worked more with poultry, there was a guy says, Ralph, I don't care if you feed them cardboard, whatever grows that better pullet is going to have a better life of egg production. And the same with plants. I'm not saying use cardboard, and he wasn't saying cardboard either, but whatever you need to feed them to keep them growing vigorously, they're gonna outcompete a lot of their problems, and they're gonna produce a lot better too. And monitor regularly so you can catch problems while they're small. I have time and time again wiped out whitefly infestations by finding small infestations or aphids, or even leaf-footed bugs, and we'll talk about that in a bit too. Harvest ripe fruits and remove unproductive plants. Sometimes plants just don't pan out, or they may be so infested with a disease you need to rogue them or just pull them out. That's perfectly fine to do. Oops. Use pesticides properly too. I tell you, for the most part, I use insecticidal soap and some spinosad. That's about it, because we want to protect the pollinators. Insecticidal soap or even some horticultural oil, I mean, they really do a good job on plants, and they break down quickly, and they tend to be less toxic or problematic for our predators and pests. And BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, that insect, the caterpillar killing microbial, also works very well too. Follow the labels, make sure, whatever you put down or spray or apply, you wait for it's called days to harvest, the interval between the time you put it on to the time you can harvest it. But those least toxic things, I think, really work well. Then there are a lot of abiotic problems that are not disease related necessarily. You've got molting. You try to grow broccoli during the summer, it's going to go to flower very quickly, and nothing's going to happen very well. Blossom drop You get tomatoes in the heat of the summer where they shouldn't be being grown. It's so hot that the blossoms drop. The the pollen never matures. It's never sets, and it doesn't work. Again, fruit set can be a problem. Um, Blossom end rot. Here's a tomato. We've all had this before. Blossom end rot is when the one end of the tomato begins to develop a rot, more or less, and it's really associated with bottom line um, infrequent or insufficient calcium uptake. So what happens is the plant's tissue at the tip there becomes fragile and tender because of lack of calcium. Then you get invasion by organisms that cause a rot, and that's the end of it. What can you do? Generally, there's enough calcium, but often it's infrequent or um, not regular watering. And this happens a lot where you have in them in containers where they filled the whole container with roots and they dry out real quick. And when they dry out, then that means there's not a good steady supply of calcium being supplied to the fruits. So regular, not saying frequent, but regular watering will take care of that a lot. Sometimes you'll find that where was I going with this? There are materials you can add that help with calcium, but I think the calcium may be just there. It's just the watering problem. And it happens on tomatoes to some degree, peppers too. Sometimes you'll have fruit set problems if you don't have enough pollinators with squash. Remember that there's two different blossoms here. These are the males that have no little fruitlet underneath. And here's the female with the little developing fruit underneath. So both have to be out at the same time in order to pollinate. Often with squash and such, the males will come out first, then finally some females, and then they'll both be out at the same time. And you can always hand pollinate those too. So well-drained site, organic matter, sock it to it. Try to identify plant problems early. Use varieties adapted to Florida, and adjust as needed to success. So we're going to take our first, where is this? Let's take our first bio break, if that's okay with everybody. And then we will start next. Let's start at 20 of, and we'll start with tropical vegetables, which I think you'll find interesting too.
Cool.
Okay. We're back, and it's time for tropical vegetables. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now I'm gonna mute you.
Yes.
All right. And again, as I mentioned, this was borrowed from Gene McAvoy, who's a retired multi-county vegetable agent and from Henry County. He's now works as a spokesperson at the Immokalee Research Station. He worked overseas in, I think, West Africa and Jamaica. So he brought a lot of interesting perspective to this. I was in Peace Corps in the Eastern Caribbean, so I know some of this as well and enjoy these vegetables. All right. So the tropics, as you can see here, is a wide expanse. And from those areas are certainly some of the fruits and vegetables that we consume today. Some are not as common, but have been introduced as different groups of people have moved to the United States, and as we've tried different types of fruit and vegetables and found favor in those. So it's, it's that particular region of the earth where the sun is pretty much overhead most of the year, and because of that, the temperatures are going to be much warmer, and so the crops, although we're subtropical, can grow here for the most part, especially during the summer, though. And again, a lot of these may have come from more jungly areas, but as people in those areas found vegetables that they could grow and settle down as far as a source of carbohydrates or proteins or flavor too, certainly these vegetables, again, which are for the most part now more common in our grocery stores. And again, a lot of them, when we grow them, they look nice too. So they have an ornamental feature as well as an edible feature. So in those ecosystems, though, we have a variety of places that are lowlands and highlands, and so as you get into some of the highlands, certainly they can become cold. You think of Hawaii as an example, not that this is concluding that so much, but in areas where the elevation is high, and even though it's in the tropics, there's still cold areas. There can also be, what do I want to say, desert areas too, in tropical areas. So they're not all lush necessarily. But, when we think of the tropics, we think of heavy rainfall, we think of I don't want to say impenetrable jungles, but a lot of places that have had to be cleared, and some places, I suppose, still may be slash and burn, where they will cut down and burn certain areas. It releases the nutrients, they grow a crop or two, and they move on to another area. Again, on small scale, subsistence type growing, it's a whole different situation than if it was an organized corporate farm of sorts, where they would grow one thing. For instance, they do a lot of palm oil cultivation in tropical areas, stuff like that. So a tropical climate here is defined as a non-arid climate in which all 12 months have a mean temperature above 64.4 Fahrenheit. There are places in the tropics that are anything but tropical, as I mentioned, deserts and tundra and cold areas as well, just because of their elevation. So here's Mauna Loa in Hawaii. Of course, there's snow there, but it's Hawaii, so you don't think of that as much. And then here's the Sahara Desert. Again, it's in the tropical area, but certainly it's still in the a tropical area, but because of the lack of rain or other environmental conditions, it's not fitting to what we'd call tropical. And then when we start going back in time too, when did we start finding a lot of these things? When was there a lot of exchange of plants and animals too? But you think of Columbus, of course, in a lot of the age of discovery, where ships and merchants and merchandise moved from place to place, whether it was in the spice trails or the New World exploration. A lot of things began to come to light, and people started to adopt or adapt some of these plants that they found. And again, within tropical areas, there's a lot of biodiversity, there's a lot of different types of, well, probably even undiscovered things too. But, look at these plants here that we have that are originally from tropical areas: tomatoes, peppers, corn, rice, coconut, banana, coffee, cocoa, cassava, which is tapioca, some types of beans, sweet potatoes, and a lot of others there too. So, again, it wasn't just, we were maybe relying at one point on our northern or temperate crops, but these other ones became favored, not only because of their, I would say, exotic nature, but people started to, I won't say get not addicted to it, but how people are with their coffee. And certainly there were flavors and such that we discovered that people liked, and it could be monetized too. And of course, where humans are, there's a lot of ways that they do different things, whether it's animal production or vegetables, and or in combination. And as we move through, certainly we continue to discover new things that may get again adopted or adapted into our culture too. So lots of different people, lots of different crops across the world, and a lot of ways to produce them, and a lot of taste too. Some things are more, I guess, acquired taste too. But within Florida, we certainly have a lot of Hispanic and people from the West Indies or the Caribbean region who have brought their foods and their spices and their flavors with them. And a lot of these we can grow here. Here you see a wide assortment of peppers. Certainly that is something that grows excellent here. And I know I grow some hot peppers too. Not for me. I don't like them, but my wife likes them. I just like them because they're colorful, but handled with care. Some other things here too. You can see this is the chayote, or they call it chocho too. To me, it tastes like patty pan squash, but it is a squash relative. You plant the whole fruit, and then out of the rear end of it comes the vine, and it grows, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 feet into the trees. And I think it's a short day stimulated plant because it has white flowers and then the fruit develop. Sometimes it gets zipped by the freezes, but we also got callaloo, which is the vegetable amaranth, boniato, some of the West Indian sweet potatoes, the calabaza, which is a tropical pumpkin, the cassava or tapioca plant. We also talked about the chayote here. But then there's a whole bunch of other ground provisions too, malanga and edo, and also different types of yams, true yams, these big hunkin roots, gigantic roots, which they would often call ground provisions. Very starchy, but that help to sustain people. Pigeon peas, I got some pigeon peas growing in my garden too. They're sort of become a shrub or a small tree, and they're just loaded in season with peas and some other things too. There's all types of things that we'll look at here. So let's start looking here. And in addition to Hispanic, Caribbean vegetables, we also had a lot of Asian vegetables too that have come in, which are, again, you might find at Asian stores, which grow really well here. And there's even some that are adapted to cool seasons too. So because where we are in our weather, these plants can tolerate the hot, humid weather. There's not been a lot of breeding, so there's not a lot of varieties necessarily. And if you got to know how to prepare it, I guess, too, is the other part. You may have tasted something that you liked, but can you actually give the recipe, I guess, is the question too. And here's Florida, which is always a cool picture of it. We're sticking out in the ocean here. But we're subtropical. We're not really truly tropical, but still that tends to be okay for growing a lot of tropical fruits and vegetables. Of course, day length varies more than in the true tropics is going to be almost equal day and nights. And so that's something that may trigger production or hold back production. But if you're going to grow some of these things, Florida is a good place to be. And we talked about, this is the same as you would for regular vegetables as far as preparing the area. I haven't found these to be particularly fussy fruits and vegetables as far as our soil that we have here. Again, organic matter, super important. Again, often raised beds of some type for good drainage is also going to be important. So here's just a guy putting down a variety of things. There's organic matter going in and the rototiller. Here's a soil test, I guess, going on. You know, this is something you rarely see. Somebody putting lime down, although in some of the areas in Punta Gorda, in the hinterlands there, they are a bit acidic. And sometimes they have to, especially the farmers, have to put some lime product down to help the forage and the various crops they're growing do better. But I'm going to say, for the most part, we're never going to be putting down, shouldn't say never, but for the most part, we're not putting down lime. Just a review again about soil pH. Most of them are going to be close to neutral. And if it's too acid, which would be, again, less than 7, we can add dolomite lime. If it's too alkaline, which is more of our problem, you know, I'm going to say most of our residential soils are 7.6 to 7.8. We could either add elemental sulfur to try to help knock the pH down, or sometimes we can use micronutrients and we can feed it to the plant through the foliage or in some other matter or an acid-loving plant type formulation that will help the plant take that nutrient in. But otherwise, you know, I would say a lot of these vegetables are fairly forgiving. Again, organic matter, just add it as much as you can. I never have enough. And it certainly builds your soil, and you'd be surprised again over the years how much improved it is, but it's because you put it in annually or even biannually. All right. Again, vegetables are heavy feeders. So we're going to make sure, again, that they are fed so they have a little bit every day to consume. Certainly things that come from fruit or produce fruit are going to be have higher needs for phosphorus and potassium. Those that produce leaves are going to have more needs for nitrogen. But the steady feeding, not only of the fertilizer, but also the water, help make a good crop occur. So there's the fertilizer. And, you know, again, a lot of this is repeat here, but just to remind you, our general macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I would say that in general, we have enough phosphorus as a statement. And also remember, too, that really vegetables are not in the landscape per se, so any of the fertilizer restrictions don't really apply to a vegetable setting. It's a whole different location versus if you know, had a regular landscape type situation. And this is a reminder too that June 1st to September 30th, we're going to go into the nitrogen and phosphorus blackout period when we don't apply that. We can, though, put a summer blend down, like a 0024. But again, that's for landscape. So getting back to these, so those are the primary nutrients, but sometimes you'll have secondary macronutrients, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, and then the micronutrients. You want to check the label on that to see what's in. A lot of these Granular ones have most of this, maybe not at all, maybe not all, but a lot of liquid ones do have a lot of these. But these are all the plant nutrients that a plant needs in order to function. So there's a lot of different things. Again, we talked a little bit about organic versus inorganic. Some's on the cost and availability. Generally, pound for pound, the organic costs a lot more. You're going to have more leaching potentially in the summer because of its rainy season. I would say no, we're not going to be really doing fertigation. That's where you put fertilizer in the irrigation water. Foliar application of nutrients sometimes occurs, though, to get nutrients in. So here's the inorganic versus organic. And, it's basically up to you. But inorganic tends to be slow release in certain formulations. High nitrogen levels early in the crop can interfere with fruit set. So that's something too to remember. If you have, we'll say like a 10-10-10, that may be something that's better for lettuce or cabbage versus maybe a 5-10-10, which might be better for plants that produce a flower and then a fruit crop, because high nitrogen levels sometimes can put a lot of growth into foliage at the expense of flowers. Inorganic, again, it's convenient because it's just readily available. It's what most of our fertilizers are, but it can burn things too because it's tends to be a little bit quicker release. It will also potentially burn leaves or roots, so you want to be careful about that. Leaching can occur often with that too, so you want to be extra careful about how much water you put down. And certainly you're never going to use a weed and feed on your vegetable garden too, and that is a fertilizer with an herbicide in it. So that's really for lawns, and then we're a little particular about that too. Organic materials, again, they're going to, well, say that you had a 10-10-10 here, an inorganic product. So a 10-10-10, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, but for the organic, you might, barely get like a 5, 6, 3, or whatever. It's going to be lower analysis, so you're not going to get as much for that. It may have a lot of the minor elements. It's going to be very slowly available because if it's made out of a combination, let's just say crab meal, blood meal, bone meal, etc., it's from its natural form. So in order for that nutrient, say nitrogen, to get out of blood meal, it takes a while for it to become available. So because of that, it doesn't burn too. It says here the analysis could be inconsistent with the actual product. I'm not sure about that. And it may or may not be available. Yeah, I mean, I would say go into any garden center, you can find plenty of organic products there. And there may be other benefits they can't really quantify at this point. So it's really a matter of what you like to use. But just so the plant is properly fed, that's what we're looking for. So, as we'll see in a few moments too, when I show you the pest issues here, certainly our pests and diseases are common to some degree in these tropical vegetables. And although a lot of them can be somewhat more tolerant, they're still going to get some problems. And certainly weeds, you want to get all the weeds out. I would say my main insect pests, time and time again, would be something like, and we'll see this in detail in the other program coming up, the melon worms, which is a caterpillar that eats the leaves. It skeletonizes the leaves of squash and melons and really makes a mess. Also, the pickle worm, which can get into squashes and other cucumber relatives. Diseases, well, and the other insect is whitefly. I have to say, whitefly is probably one of the worst ones, not only because of its numbers, because the adults fly away and it's hard to kill them sometimes because of that, but because they carry viruses too, and that can be a real downer. Diseases, because of the heat and humidity, you're going to get a lot of foliar diseases that can come up. And of course, nematodes. Okay, let's go on here. If we were to manage insects again, we're going to use the integrated pest management system where we first identify the pest. What is it? Are there sufficient numbers to warrant a treatment? And then least toxic first. Some of our predators and parasites will control them to a degree. But again, I'm going to say the insecticidal soap, BT to a degree. But the spinosad, I really have had good success with knocking down the melon worms, being the worst pest, I would say. And because of the rains and such, you might have problems supplying some of this. So that can be a little bit tricky too. Again, with the diseases, you'll get a variety because of the heat and the humidity. And often these things can be splashed around or introduced through wounds. And, we can try to use some fungicides. Our number one would probably be copper. But as diseases build up or to prevent buildup, I would say rotation is always a good practice. Move it to a different part of the garden, and solarization to a degree. Sometimes you have to abandon areas and solarize them, or just abandon them and plant something else. Again, I had yellow leaf curl virus on tomatoes, on cherry tomatoes. And I literally had to abandon one garden to tomatoes and put something totally unrelated into it and try tomatoes in another area, which worked anyways. So sometimes location is part of the solution there. A lot of these tropical vegetables don't have a lot of resistance built into them, other than they can take the heat. We talked about soil solarization, rotation, and again, some of these chemical things are a little bit late as far as disease control, and may not be warranted because it's too late sometimes. All right, let's get into some of the real meat of what this program's about, which is the specific crops here. The amaranth here, the vegetable amaranth, and I've got some planted. I've got 2 sets planted right now. It's really tastes like spinach. It's depending, there's a lot of varieties. You can get red ones, red and green, pure green. So there's a lot of different cultivars of this, but really what it is pigweed. So it's a weed that and again, amaranth is a weed, it's a vegetable, it's a grain crop too, and it's also an ornamental, and often it's the same plant, just different cultivars there. But what you do with this is the seed are very fine and small, but they come up pretty thick. So, this looks like some of my crop right now, and you harvest it, and then you keep harvesting it, the new shoots come out. It certainly, when you cook it, it does wilt down a lot, but I tell you, it's a really good heat tolerant substitution for spinach during the summer. Caterpillars to a degree are a problem, and it will eventually go to seed if you're not careful too. But I used to collect the seed but sometimes I just forget to do it and bust buy another set. But I've got one big crop that's we're feeding off of, and a new one just coming in. So very, very easy to grow, and it works perfect as a substitute. Now, New Zealand spinach, I don't think I probably have grown it once, but not here in Florida. It's another spinach substitute. You grow from seed, and it's very spinach-like, I guess you could say. Sort of a vining material in a way as well. I would say I do grow more than anything the Malabar spinach, and I didn't like this initially. I found it was a little bit too glutinous, a lot of mucilage, a lot of gooiness to it there. But my wife fixed it pretty good, and so it's very tasty. It can be a bit ornamental because there are red and green varieties, and some just have a red vine, but they grow easily from a cutting or from a seed, so you can get that. And good moisture is important, because if they go dry a bit, they'll start setting flowers and seed, and then they get sort of tough. But it's generally the succulent leaves that you would harvest, and then you would again use like a spinach on that. Okay, chicaya, or they call it Aztec spinach, Mexican spinach. It's an interesting plant. It does grow as a shrub. I probably saw one somewhere in Miami-Dade that was probably, let's see, I see a couple of questions here. Just want to get to it in case something's going on. Oh, how does your wife cook it? No, I would not eat it raw. The question is, how does your wife cook it? We have it growing, and it's pretty gross raw. Yeah, I would say it's nothing that I would ever eat raw. I think it does best cooked, and just like you would a spinach. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to it. I would say a little bit of onion mixed into it, a little garlic, and you're good to go. The kaya, however, I've never tried this, but I do have a plant of it. And again, I've seen it up to like 15 foot, but we'll say 6 foot average. The leaves remind you, I guess, a little bit of okra, but at a glance, almost like a papaya leaf too. Grows easily from cuttings. And there are two types. There's one that I've never seen around here, so you probably will never encounter it, but it has like little stinging hairs. But the ones I've seen, and I think we have one in the demo garden still too, don't have the hairs, but you have to cook it still to get the, I guess it's the cyanide out of it, you know. Yeah, who wants to eat something with cyanide? But the cooking tends to break it down. I think it might be recommended to cook it twice, but it's very high in protein. And, you know, as a subsistence food, when, you know, nothing else is around, this would probably work pretty well for you. So it's just another leafy green that you could try. Grows very, very easily. It has white flowers too, which I guess attract butterflies to a degree as well. Oops. Let's see. Okay, purslane. Now, purslane again it's an ornamental, it's a weed, and it's also an edible. And this is really getting a little glutinous, but and I don't think I've ever eaten it, but there are cultivated types that are improved. I think they call it golden purslane. I think Johnny's Seed sells that actually. But the young leaves are very succulent, and you probably have seen purslane, very gooey material. So I couldn't tell you how to prepare it, but it does say I guess it's rich in omega-3 fatty acids. So I prefer mine as ornamental, though. Now, roselle or sorrel, I was first introduced this in the West Indies. It was a Christmas treat because the guess it's the short days stimulate it to flower, and it's a hibiscus relative, not to be confused with that false roselle or cranberry uh, roselle, I think there. But this one has green leaves, and the flowers look like a little hibiscus, whitish yellow color, and then it produces these calyxes that you harvest, and then you can make. To me, it tastes like cranberry juice. You can make a red drink out of it. They actually dry it too, so you can use it later. And again, it grows like okra. It's easy to grow, and if you've never tried it, it's an interesting, we'll say, Christmas drink there. Now, some of the mustards, I guess, too, especially some of the Asian mustards, are more heat tolerant. But boy, I tell you, mustards can get a real strong flavor. But it says these have a milder flavor for stir fry and such. I've never grown this during the summer, and so I don't have a necessarily opinion on it. I like mustard to a degree, but I like kale and collard in the winter a lot better. Chinese broccoli, again, more as a leafy or stir fry material. Doesn't have the big heads or anything here. If you look on a lot of Asian vegetable catalogs, you'll see a lot of these type of materials available. Again, I haven't been inspired to grow this yet. Let's just say that. Now this one is very interesting. I'm going to call it water spinach. And it's a terrible invasive. Let's just say that. However, a couple of places got permits, and I think that it's in Pinellas County, because it's such an ethnic favored material that they were allowed to grow it in greenhouses so that it didn't escape, because the plant itself, and I think there were some people that tried growing it or somehow ended up in wet ditches. I think somewhere in Punta Gorda, out in the hinterlands there, and it will just grow everywhere. It's actually a type of morning glory, but they will eat the leafy shoots as a vegetable, and I'm sure they're good, but they're just very invasive. So literally, you can't possess or grow this unless you get a permit. Let's just say that. I suppose you could probably buy it at an Asian market to eat, but you don't want this to get away, because it will literally just fill in a body of water with a solid growth of this, and that's how bad it is. But probably tasty. Legumes. Here's the pigeon pea, and there's a lot of different types. Some have yellow, some have red flowers. I've always gotten them the seeds at Echo. I got some others I've tried, and they can really produce a ton of peas. So again, it's probably more of a Christmas time harvest, because it has a bit of a growing season there. But you can eat you can shell the pods and eat them green, or you can dry them. You find them in supermarkets now too. They're delicious. I mean, when I used to eat them in the Peace Corps, to me they were like candy. They were so delicious. And the shrub grows in very poor conditions, so it's sort of a short life shrub. It does really well the first year, and then it gets not as good the second year. So you want to replace it, but it does produce a woody plant of sorts there. But very productive. It's very time consuming to pick and shell all those, though, I will say. Yard long bean. Now, I've just got some that are just starting to produce, and they are a type of cowpea, and you can harvest them pretty much at any stage. I suppose you could even keep the seeds as a dry bean too. They go from flower to long bean very, very quickly. I don't know if I've ever had any that were 36 inches, but There's a number of cultivars, and there's even a red potted one. But generally, you try to pick the pod before the seeds get too big, because then it gets sort of husky, and then it's, just the beans would be able to be shelled out of that. You want to eat them as really a snap bean substitute. But when they get bigger, of course, they're going to become more of a cowpea type plant. But vigorous, they need a trellis, although there are some bush types too. But you just got to get out there and start looking for them, because they hide in the foliage pretty well too. Lima beans, I've never had good luck with lima beans. I mean, it's a Native American plant, which is interesting. I didn't like lima beans as a kid. I like them now, but I have not. I've had a lot of problem with white flies and aphids, and it just didn't seem to do as well. But I'm willing to try again. So, um, if you should try them too. The wing bean, I tried it once and I didn't give it a very good growing conditions, but it's interesting. I mean, it produces um, foliage as a bean, but it also produces these winged beans. They're just they have edges on them, or wings, that make them look very unusual. So they're angled, I guess you could mention. An edible tuber, and the young shoots can be eaten. It does require short days for flowering, so sometimes it may be to the end of the season as we begin to get short days to trigger that too. So I can't say I've grown this successfully, but I didn't give it the very best conditions either. The hyacinth bean, to me, up north, this was always an ornamental, not an edible at all. It has purplish leaves and purplish flowers, so they're very beautiful ornamental plant. But I've never thought of eating them. But it says here, although high yielding, may produce disagreeable odor on cooking. So I'm still not prepared to be cooking those. Just saying. All right, fruiting vegetables. Lots of peppers. I mean, most of them are going to be hot pepper types, because they can tend to take the heat a lot better. But there's probably some that are sweet too in there. And these are going to be ones that are native to the Americas, and I guess as well as some from Asia too. Of course, they're going to include some of the hottest ones, and I don't like to be burned when I'm eating my food, but I do like the flavor of some. And some have definite flavors to them, and but in some cultures the heat is everything. So I think they're beautiful. I think they're very ornamental, and of course there are a lot of ornamental ones you can grow as well. And I don't think this is the hottest one anymore. I think it's that Carolina Reaper, but there's always a next one that's hottest. But they're beautiful, and if you like the heat, you're good to go on these. They're very productive. I will say the number one pest has got to be white flies, and they can just sneak in, and all of a sudden you've got clouds of talcum powder all over the place from the adults flying around. Here's one, the Aji Dulce, popular in Puerto Rico. And again, some of these have, some places have their country favorites too. Trinidad and through the West Indies and Puerto Rico and such. A lot of these do great as container plants. And again, if you're handling these, keep in mind there's oils on these, so that when you've touched them, if you touch like your eyes or something, you're going to get burned by it. So make sure you wash your hands very carefully when you're picking these. There's some sweet varieties too. I think that hot peppers do better than the sweet peppers, though. So you'll have to experiment with them. There's got to be a few sweet peppers that can take it, but your typical ones that you would grow up north, the bell type peppers, are not going to do as well in the heat here. I think a lot of it may be the pollination. So those are going to be more as your August, fall, early winter crop. And with peppers in general, you got to give them a lot of space because some of these hot peppers, they can become almost short-term perennials, and they'll last for more than a year. You don't want to give them too much nitrogen because that will produce a lot of leaves and at the expense of fruiting. And again, they have their ornamental value as well. There's some diseases and such of peppers too, aphids. Broad mites will cause this damage right here. It's sort of withered, um, distorted growth, and that's caused by this microscopic mite. I mean, you can barely see it with a microscope, but it causes a lot of damage. Pepper weevil is another one too. You'll get peppers that will all of a sudden get a hole in them, and there's been a weevil feeding inside, messing it all up. So there's a number of different ones, but again, I would say that generally crop rotation helps control a lot of that. Eggplants do great. I would say without a fault, the Asian eggplants do better than in the hot time of the year, the long, thin ones, or some of the ones that you wonder, I don't know if I want to eat that. Some of the green ones, or um, there's some white and green and purple and white striped ones, but generally long, thin types, which would be Asian types. And here's this would be ones that are regularly do well in the summer. Here's the classic eggplant with an egg-like fruit on it, and some others, and some sort of bitter ones that are probably cooked in a lot of different ways. I think the red ones here, they call them cannibal tomatoes or something. But they may be from the old world too, as far as where they were favored and cultivated for that particular type. But these thin ones do very well. They're very productive too, and so you got to keep on picking them so they don't get overripe. Here's another one, a green type one. Again, turning from green to orange red at maturity. A lot of these, they did come from the old world as far as their origin, and a lot of them are bitter though, and that seems to be, again, an ethnic flavor when it's used in different things. I just like mine as a meat substitute, really. I can't pronounce this. Naranjila. Golden fruit of the Andes. I prefer that name. I've tried this once, and I probably didn't give it a good chance. It takes a while to develop the plant as an eggplant relative, but the leaves are beautiful. They're sort of got this purple haze or pubescence on them. They produce then this orange fruit, which is used, I guess, in a drink type material, is like a sweet drink. But the plant I grew, and this was years ago, frosted out. I could probably try it again. But I grew from seed. I'd never grown it before. But all these are sort of exotics too, and something to try. Garden huckleberry, I've never grown this either. It's related to the nightshade plants, as are tomatoes and peppers and things. But supposedly, the edible black or purple when it's fully ripe is edible. The green is not. Says do not confuse with deadly nightshade, but it's in the same family. So I have not bothered to try this, but you can get the seeds online. Again, tomatoes, so many different types. If you're going to attempt to grow tomatoes in the summer, I would do it as a mid-spring to early summer crop. The cherry or grape ones are fine. The large fruited ones, they just won't pollinate very well when it gets too hot. I have grown the Everglades tomatoes, and to me they're so small, and my sausage fingers tend to pop them when I try to pick them. Number one, and number two, they produce so much you just can't keep up after a while. But I did have success with them. I think it was last summer I tried those. But stick with the cherry types if you were going to try to do any during the summer. Lots of varieties to pick from. Try to get ones that are disease resistant. Now I've grown tomatilla too, just to see if I could grow it. It's really related to husk tomatoes. If you've ever seen those, it grows just like a tomato. It produces abundantly, but unless you know how to make salsa, which I didn't, I didn't know what to do with them really, and I just couldn't. The taste themselves is not my favorite, but they look nice. They're interesting to grow, and they come in green, sort of a purplish one too. Okra grows like crazy. I've got a favorite one. It's orange gin, Jing, jing, orange jing, and it has a reddish orange fruit, or a seed pod rather, and the leaves on the plants are reddish too, so it's ornamental as well. Grows really well. It's easy. You just got to keep up on the picking, because they go from one day when they're inch and a half, and a couple days later they're 6 inches, and they're too husky to really use after that. Easy to grow. Vine crops, calabaza. This is a tropical pumpkin grown throughout the West Indies, and the UF has worked on some of these to make more bush types, because it is a popular and not a cheap butternut squash substitute. I really like it. I like the looks of the fruits and such there, and the very bright orange flesh. Good as a butternut squash substitute. And you can get the seeds of some of the better varieties at Echo in North Fort Myers. You can probably order them online too from them if they're not open. So there's the calabaza and some of the ones they've worked on. Does produce quite well, but it is favored with Caribbean or say West Indian and Hispanic cultures. Is the chayote or coyote. Where I was from, they called it chocho, so that's how I knew it. Or Christophine was another name. But the seed is huge in here, but you plant the whole fruit, and then the seed sprouts. Sometimes the seed sprouts before you plant it even. But it has very long vines, has a white flower. And there is an if you ever go to some flea markets that sell vegetables, there is I think they call it a Guatemalan one, it's spiny. It's got these soft spines all over it. Very interesting. But it tastes like patty pan squash. Very good. But it may not begin to fruit until we get short days. So sometimes it's late in the summer, early fall before you start seeing some of that. Winter melon, never grown it. It's an Asian fruit here. Again, it can keep for quite a while. I think it may be something that you would use as pickles or as a cooked vegetable. So I can't really say much about that. Bitter melon, I have grown that. We have that weedy one, the balsam pear that grows around, which is really toxic. But these cultivated types, which I would call bitter melon, or Corilla, as they're often called in Indian culture too, of a lot of different varieties. They tend to be sort of knobby, weird-looking cucumbers. You need to trellis them. They're quite a long crop, as far as 3-4 months before you start getting some fruit off it. And it does have a bitter taste. Some are less bitter than others, but it's a taste a lot of cultures like too. Loofahs. And my wife introduced it to me because she's from Guyana, South America originally. But loofahs are often, we use them as a dishcloth or a bathing sponge thing. But the young fruits are as good as, zucchini. And so I've eaten these before, and they're not bad. They're vigorous growers. They need plenty of space. I mean, sometimes they just grow by accident too. But they are edible, and if you miss it, then you get yourself a nice bathing sponge there. As well as some of these edible gourds, which could be Italian or Asian types too. Again, big fruits, and you got to eat them with, pick them when they're smallish too. Um, there's also the snake gourd, which I like, and I used to eat that in the West Indies too. It was called chichira, and it was sort of a white and green striped vegetable. And again, well, let's see. Okay, going the wrong way here. Boniato, which to me is, I'd call it the West Indian sweet potato. It's got a red skin, a white, very sweet flesh, very different. Not, I find regular sweet potatoes to be too sweet, almost a cloying sweet, but these taste, I don't know, they're drier, they're flakier. The sweetness is nicer. I just really like these a lot. You just grow them like you would a sweet potato. And again, they're a long season though, 180 days. So you got to get them in early, although we've got the time here for sure. Dashin, well, it's a name, I know it as Edo. Now in the Pacific, it would be taro, where you'd make the poi out of it. And it is a tuberous plant. You'd plant the tubers. The leaves can be eaten too. I think you have to peel them a bit. But the tubers, when you cook, you got to peel them, and they have a lot of sort of stickiness on them. Um, you peel them, you cook them, they turn gray, which may be an unappealing color to you, but they're very good. They're just nutty, nice potato substitutes. I really like it. And I do grow some too. Cocoyam, you start having some other types of, again, these elephant ear like ground provisions. And you see these in the supermarket. They start getting a little confusing because they start looking very similar to each other there. But I don't grow those. I do grow some cassava. You have to get the sweet varieties. The bitter ones are the ones that are toxic, and you've got to, process them to death to get all the toxins out. The sweet ones still need to be cooked, and I think that gets any of the toxins out of there. But it is the source of tapioca. They produce the starch-filled tubers, and they can grow in really poor soil. there are ornamental varieties too. There's a tricolor one with red, yellow, and green striped leaves, which is nice. But the one I've got, Jamaican Sweet, I got at Echo, and it does produce shoots. It sometimes takes up to 2 years for me to get some shoots out that you could use. But if you ever had, there's a Cuban restaurant where I would get yuca. They call it yuca too, and boy, it's delicious. They cook it with onion and vinegar or something. I just love it. Yams, I have grown true yams before. You simply buy a yam and take out the tip of it there, the growing point, and plant it, and you'll get this vigorous, big, heart leaf-shaped plant. And it will take some time to develop, and I never grew really big ones. I probably got ones as big as a coconut, I guess. And they produce, again, they're a white or a yellow type starchy tuber, but in the West Indies, they were huge. They were gigantic. Jicama, I've eaten it before, but I've never grown it. You've seen these in the supermarkets. Crispy, it's almost like water chestnut. But everything else is poisonous. So it's one of those things, you got to know what you're eating. But the jicama vegetable, and I believe it's from Mexico, South America area, is edible. Everything else is poisonous though. Some herbs, to me, these aren't tropical. So to me, cilantro grows best in the winter. It's a cool season plant. So I love cilantro, and so I do grow it every year. I've never grown the culantro, which is very similar in flavor. I think you got to get plants for it though. Well, it says grown from seed. Okay, but I've never grown this before. Lemongrass, I do have a lemongrass plant. I like that too. Certainly adds a nice little tang to things. The Cuban oregano, or they call it large leaf thyme too, certainly has a strong smell. Used a lot in the West Indies too. There's a variegated one and a pure green one too. I've had some that has grown out of control, but they'll produce more than you'll ever need. Where to get these things? Well, it says here, don't smuggle things in the United States. That's the first thing. All these things are available online. Echo is a really good source for all types of things, whether you get seed or you get started plants. So Echo has really got everything. And again, I don't know with the coronavirus what's going on with that, but they generally, I think they will do online sales of the seed. So check that. Just start looking online for this, that, and the other seed, and you'll find it. So here's some of the Tradewind. I bought the, seeds from them before. Redwood Seed Company, I bought from them. I'm not sure about these other ones here. So you'll have to check and see what's available online, but you can find almost everything. And sometimes it's even, neighbors might have some of these things they can share pieces with. If you're looking for other than Edis publications, this Minor Vegetables by Dr. Jim Stevens is very good too. Just short little clippets on a lot of, again, things that are considered minor vegetables, which a lot of these things we've talked about. And that is Gene McAvoy's son, now grown. I think he's probably a PhD or something now. And his joke of what Henry County Extension Office looks like, but that's not it. Let's just say that. So let's take another break. Let's start back at 10 of, and we'll finish the time off with pests. So go take your little bio break. I'm going to. I'll be back in 10 minutes.